Welcome to Campfire Football. I'm Sebastian North. Let's review the CONCACAF Gold Cup group stage. So in this video, we're going to cover 3 topics. Number 1, a little group stage review with some of my personal highlights. Number 2, we're going to go over the US team, and I'm going to break some players down into 4 categories. Those I was impressed with, those I'd like to see more of, those who are skating on thin ice, and those who we need to just say bye-bye to. And finally, we'll round out with looking at the knockout rounds and try to do some fun predictions. I want your opinions in the comment section, so do that. Okay, number 1, let's go over some of the group stage stories that I found interesting and that I enjoyed. First off, let's start with one of the most wild matches of the group stage, Costa Rica against Martinique. This turned out to be a 10-goal party. So Costa Rica had lost their first match 2-1 to Panama, had drawn 0-0 against El Salvador, and frankly, they looked poor. I mean, Joe Campbell is still pretty much their best player. Martinique, on the other hand, are a small island nation that was embarking on possibly a fairy tale run. They had to go through the first preliminary qualifying round by beating St. Lucia, and then they beat Puerto Rico 2-0 to get into the group stage. And they got off to a flying start, scoring in the 11th and the 16th minute of their opening match against El Salvador, taking a 2-0 lead and holding on for a 2-1 victory. Now, they lost to Panama in their second match, but they were still in second place and in control of their own destiny. So there was a lot riding on the line for both Costa Rica and Martinique. Costa Rica took the lead in the 9th minute after a set piece and a goal-mouth scramble, but then Martinique equalized with a sublime curling goal from Patrick Bernet. I don't know. But then they conceded an identical but even more comical goal. Another set piece, another scrap in the 6-yard box, and somehow there's an own goal of sorts. It's a mess, and they're down 2-1 at halftime. And then Costa Rica took off in the second half, scoring in the 53rd, the 58th, and then the 68th minute to take a 5-1 lead. It's got to be game over at this point. But you've got to hand it to Martinique. They got themselves a lifeline through a penalty to make it 5-2, and then they scored again to make it 5-3. Could there possibly be a comeback? No, Costa Rica would score again, and then Martinique would score late. Final score of 6-4. There were 9 goal scorers out of the 10 goals. All right, let's move on to my second highlight, Guatemala. I would love to see this country do something on the football stage. And for what I've seen so far, it looks like they also understand there's a real opportunity for them here. The matches have a feel as if they're being played at home in Guatemala City. There are so many Guatemalans in the crowd. It's a sea of white and blue. So they're loud, they create an amazing atmosphere, they help push the team on, and they do rattle the opposition as well. I mean, the whole camp looks fired up, the crowd, every single match. Just look at the way they celebrated their game winner against Guadeloupe. Oh, and these kits are so slick. I'm a huge fan of this jersey. The cool thing about Guatemala's squad, it's a local team. Only 6 players in the entire squad play outside of Guatemala. Rubio Rubin from Real Salt Lake being the most notable one. The rest all play their trade domestically for either Municipal, Comunicaciones, or Antigua. So most of these guys are pretty much unknown, which makes this a massive opportunity for their own personal careers, but also for the growth of their nation going to try and qualify for the World Cup in 2026. They have to be seeing this as a massive building block. If they can do well or maybe even win this competition, it would be a huge step for them preparing for the World Cup, because keep in mind, the United States, Mexico, and Canada are automatically going to qualify. This paves the way for all these sort of secondary Central American and Caribbean teams. All right, the next story and highlight is Guadeloupe. This is actually a department of France still, so they are not a FIFA member, meaning they cannot qualify for the World Cup. Martinique are actually in the exact same boat. So considering they can't qualify for the World Cup, the only tournaments they have are the Caribbean Cup and the Gold Cup, meaning this is the biggest competition they can play in and win. Their head coach is Jocelyn Angloma, who I remember from when I was a kid. He actually played for France 37 times. He also won the 1993 Champions League with Marseille and was in the final with Valencia in 2000 and 2001, ending up runner-up both times. So the guy's got pedigree, and it's really cool to see him coaching this team. And they looked actually really good. They took the lead through Terry Ambrose in their opening match against Canada. This was a really nice goal. Awful defending. And then Canada sort of turned it up in the second half, took a 2-1 lead, and you figured this is how it should end. But Guadeloupe fought hard, managed to equalize, get a point in their first match, and get themselves going. Then they would play against Cuba. And this was astonishing. Look, I know nothing about these Guadeloupe players, and after watching them play, I was like, yo, these dudes can ball. Matthias Faiton got the party started with an absolute bomb in the top bins, and Guadeloupe were sort of dropping back, soaking up pressure from Cuba and trying to hit them on the break. It gave you the vibe that they were the weaker team. But then they just turned on the style. Ange-Freddy Plumin scored this ridiculous curler before Matthias Faiton would make it 3-0 a couple minutes later with this really nice low strike into the bottom corner. So he thought maybe Cuba would be able to roar back in the second half, but then Guadeloupe scored the best goal of the day. Anthony Barron putting them in dreamland after he sidesteps one defender, pirouettes another, and then toe pokes the ball in. I mean, these guys were having their own goal of the competition tournament in one game. So this victory against Cuba set up a clash against Guatemala that was big for Guadeloupe. Guadeloupe at least needed a draw. A victory would guarantee that they went through to the quarterfinal. They actually took the lead 1-0, were pegged back, and then took the lead again. But Guatemala, as I said, the crowd is behind them, and they just had too much in the end, winning 3-2 and sending Guadeloupe packing. I'm going to miss them. They really lit up the group stage for me. All right, that's enough for group stage highlights. Let's move on to the U.S. national team. Honestly, there wasn't a whole lot to take away in terms of the performances because two of the opponents were complete cannon fodder, and Jamaica was the first game where a bunch of the guys had never really even played together before. I thought they fared well enough against Jamaica. There was a lot of criticism, but a 1-1 draw against a team like that is totally acceptable. And then they went on to pound the next two teams they played. So they did exactly what they had to do and ended up topping the group. So I wanted to evaluate individual performances instead of team performances because this is an experimental squad and I want to know who is actually going to stick around when this competition is over. Who impressed? Jesus Ferreira, obviously. Back-to-back hat tricks, yes, against extremely poor opposition, but let's be honest, the way he took the goals was very good. Quick shots, minimal backlift, good positioning, scored his penalty. Now he needs to carry this on against better opposition as the competition goes. Next one is James Sands. Now, look, I like James Sands because as a central midfielder, he does his job. He's not flashy. He's not a guy who's going to dribble past people and go and find little incisive balls at the top of the box. But he's pretty good at intercepting the ball and reading the play. He wins tackles, and he is a pretty good long-distance passer as well. He does not turn the ball over much, which is really important. The third one that impressed me was Georgi Mihailovic. He's not Gio Reyna and he's not Christian Pulisic, so he's not quite the creative player that is going to break into the starting 11. But he does give goals and assists. He produces when he's on the field. So far, he's scored twice, got 2 assists, but it's more his build-up play that impressed me. Just look at the class here, his patience, his timing, and the weight of the pass to set up the second goal against Trinidad and Tobago. I don't know if he's really ever going to be a mainstay in the team, but he certainly has something to offer. All right, guys I'd like to see a little bit more of. Alex Zendejas. Clearly, he's liked by BJ Callahan. He's played in every game, and he has shown up well. I thought he was one of the better players against Jamaica. He kind of just looks like he fits into the whole mold of things. It'd be interesting to see him with the starting bunch as well. Another left-footed attacking midfielder I'd like to see more of is Alan Sonora. Now, he suffered an injury, so he was sent home. We won't see him again in the Gold Cup, but I think the program likes him, so he'll play again. I think he's a guy with a lot of potential. His game's all about getting into little spaces, finding good passes, combining with people. There isn't much room for just like a luxury connector in this team. But he's young, and I'd like to see if he can offer more down the line. The next one is a weird one maybe for some people. It's John Tolkien. Now, I really liked the way he played at left back against Jamaica. He kept Leon Bailey pretty quiet and was back and forth across the field trying to create an attack as well. But so far, he's a guy I would like to see again at some point, especially in this Gold Cup. All right, number 3, let's talk about the guys who really need to step up. These are guys who are in danger of eventually just ending up in the cold and never playing for the U.S. again. Okay, except the third one. First is Gianluca Buzio. Now, he went to Venezia, they got relegated, and he's been with them a second season, and he only really starts 50% of the time. It's not ideal, but he was called back into this camp. He didn't play against Jamaica, did play against St. Kitts and Nevis, and didn't really have much of an impact in a game the U.S. won 6-0. Pretty much everyone was having fun in that game, except for him. Now, against Trinidad and Tobago in North Carolina, his home state, he did get a goal, but again, it was a lot of hard work, and he just didn't quite seem like he made much of a difference. He's got to be careful for his career because if he's not really playing in Europe and he's not actually performing against poor teams when he's in the national team, I don't know how long we'll be seeing him. So he needs to step up. The next one is Matt Miazga. Now, defenders have had not very much to do in this tournament, but the one goal that was conceded, the free kick against Jamaica, looked like Matt Miazga's fault. The thing is, he's in a position, center back, which is pretty open. So as the competition in this Gold Cup gets a little more stiff, it'll be interesting to see who in defense actually plays well and cements some kind of spot down the line. The last one is Cade Cowell. This may seem harsh. Now, I made the exception of this third one as he's not one of those guys who's probably just going to end up in the cold soon. He's still a teenager. He had a very good Under-20 World Cup in Argentina. He was one of the stars down there, and he had quite an impact when he came out against Trinidad and Tobago, scoring a really memorable goal and having a really nice assist. I mean, he played very, very well. He's raw, he's quick, he's got a little bit of a funky touch sometimes. He kind of reminds me of Adama Traore, the one from Wolves. In moments, he can be so devastatingly dangerous because he's powerful and fast and seems really technical. But then all of a sudden, sometimes he'll get a ball and just dribble it straight out of play. The thing about these types of players is that some of them grow up, mature, and become very productive, while others just stagnate. And at 27, 28 years old, we're still talking about them not really having end product and so much potential. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what he does with his career. Does he leave San Jose and go maybe to Europe, or does he stay in the MLS and try and stack up numbers over the next 2 or 3 years and assure himself a spot in the team by just getting time on the field? We'll see. All right, the last section. Who should be told thanks, but goodbye? And I would love your opinions in the comments section. Please tell me what you think. I can already see Aaron Long down there. I can already see it, but that's not what I'm going to say. I'm going to give you 3 different ones. First one's Jordan Morris. This is a guy who has had a very good career in MLS. He's won a bunch of titles with Seattle Sounders, but I remember one thing Jermaine Jones once said about him.
I called Jordan Morris and I talked with him. And I asked him, I said, I know that Werder Bremen really wants you, and you can play there and you have the opportunity. You never know what comes after. You play already Bundesliga and you can go farther. And he said, you know what? I want to go home. My dad is the doctor in Seattle, and my mom, they bought me and my girlfriend the dog and all kind of stuff. I was, really?
Well, when you look at Jordan Morris now, all he looks like is a good, solid MLS player. But this is not what should be selected for a World Cup team. And it's not what should be in the future plans as well. So I would say at this point, just cut him loose. Let him enjoy his time in Seattle. The next one is Christian Roldan, who is basically just a midfield version of what I just described. Christian Roldan is a decent player, but I'm not sure what he brings that Zendejas and Mihailovic and even Senora don't. Honestly, they're just more creative players. They just give you more in the final third. So I just really don't know if there's a point in keeping Roldan around when there's so many other young options in midfield that you want to grow for the future. And finally, the stalwart, DeAndre Yedlin. The guy looks like Billy Madison around all these players. I mean, he was in the World Cup squad in 2014 in Brazil. You're telling me there's not a backup right back that we should be playing and planning for the future? This is the thing, is there's some nations who do rely on their old players because they need that leader. They need that person. And maybe DeAndre Yedlin is a great locker room presence. I don't know. But the United States needs to be thinking about 2026. Every single decision about squad selection needs to be with the World Cup in mind. It can't just be like, oh, well, let's see what this older guy brings us at this time. Basically, there's always going to be better options from here on out. So I'd like to explore those and not see these guys again. No offense to them. They're good players. They've done their stuff, but it's time to move on. All right, let's wrap this up by looking at the knockout round. First one is Panama versus Qatar. Now, I actually don't know if Qatar is going to be in the Gold Cup again after this. This may be their last rodeo. But they made it to the knockout round by somehow beating Mexico 1-0 with their only shot of the game. They conceded 24 shots. Yes, only one was on target. But wow, what a smash and grab that is. Either way, I'm picking Panama, who will play against either United States or Canada. A rematch of the Nations League final. Sort of. Not really, actually. The squads are totally different. Canada are in total disarray. Their federation said they might have to file for bankruptcy at some point. Everything's just a mess for them right now. There are rumors that they aren't even allowed to trade jerseys with teams because the federation wants to make sure that they don't spend too much. That's wild. Meanwhile, the United States are just cruising in this competition. They're chopping and changing the lineup. Everyone's trying to get a piece of the pie and have fun. And really, they just look like they're in a better place. I think the United States win this one and go on to play Panama. So that's that side of the bracket. The next one is Mexico versus Costa Rica. Costa Rica are kind of lucky to be at this stage of the competition. Beating Martinique 6-4 is what got them through. Mexico have shown up in this tournament, having to make up for their embarrassment in the Nations League. So Mexico, I think, all day in this one. And the final one, Guatemala versus Jamaica. This is the toughest one to call. I mentioned Guatemala. I've really enjoyed the way they are, their intensity, the fans. It's going to be interesting to see how they get on. But Jamaica are also an interesting team. They've got Bobby D. Cordova-Reed, Michael Antonio, Leon Bailey, and Damari Gray. All this Premier League experience helping the front line score goals. I just think with Jamaica's know-how and experience, they'll go through, but only just. But overall, group stage of the Gold Cup, it was loads of fun. I hope you all enjoyed it. And hopefully some of these guys have built up a little noise around them and it can change some people's careers. Now, let's find out who's going to win this thing. Thanks for stopping by. I'm Sebastian North. This is Campfire Football. Take it easy.